You're watching Scriptease. In today's episode, we're looking at the screenwriting of Frank Darabont. I'll be covering the Shawshank Redemption, so you can expect spoilers for the whole film. I suggest watching the film before watching this video. Last episode, I closed with the advice that by examining the works of acclaimed screenwriters, we can draw inspiration, learning from their example to refine our own craft. Not copying their style per se, but noticing how they wield their screenwriting tools and adapting this for our own creations. Today we'll be looking at the man who wrote the screenplay for The Shawshank Redemption, a must-see film that is consistently listed as one of the best movies of all time. This man is Frank Darabont, a Hungarian-American filmmaker with a love of the fantastic. Following the 1956 Hungarian Revolution, Darabont's parents fled to a French relocation camp, where Darabont was born in 1959. Darabont's family eventually made the move to America, where they first lived in Chicago. At the age of 12, Darabont moved to Los Angeles, where his career in the film industry would soon begin. Darabont remembers watching Shock Theatre as a kid, a collection of Universal classic monster films like Dracula and Frankenstein. In fact, his father's side originated from Transylvania, historically a region near modern-day Hungary and Romania, but now associated with scary vampires and werewolves, thanks to authors like Bram Stoker. He would grow up listening to mad tales from his grandmother about such creatures of the night.
My grandmother was, nuts. She totally believed in vampires and all the most crazy, stuff. So I grew up hearing that this shit was real, So it kind of came as a surprise to me that it's really kind of not. It's mostly imaginative.
Even as a kid, Darabont knew he wanted to become a storyteller in some form.
You do have this vague notion of I'd like to grow up and make movies, or I'd love to grow up and write books. I want to tell stories. I'd love to grow up and be a storyteller. I'm sure you experienced the same kind of vague notion.
He cites two films regularly as flashpoints for his love of cinematic storytelling. The first film he ever saw in a theater was Robinson Crusoe on Mars at the age of 5. The grand scope of it all was awe-inspiring to him. He even made his brother stay there to watch another 3 times before they left.
It just was in full color. It was on a big screen. And it was sound, and it was fantasy, and it was storytelling, and it was wonderful. And it just blew my mind. And I think even before I understood really what it was that I was watching, that people actually crafted these things. Because when you're that age, it's just magic and it happens. But even before I really grasped what that was, I wanted to do it. I knew it was somehow telling stories.
At the age of 12, Darabont saw the sci-fi film THX 1138. Seeing a single mind's vision executed so robustly, realizing that someone's job was to create this world, acted as the second big inspiration for Darabont.
And it blew my mind in a lot of ways, but I felt the first time really I felt the imprinter of the filmmaker. At 12 years old, I'm watching this movie, and I suddenly had this sort of epiphany. Whoever's making this is standing just off the edge of the screen, and I can't see him. That somebody's also sharing a very unique world view with me. It ain't just to entertain me, but it's also sharing something on a deeper level.
Darabont's love of storytelling was finally given an avenue for its expression as he worked in the theater department at his high school, Hollywood High. After graduating, Darabont made a living working on low-budget films, like 1981's Hell Night as a set dresser and PA, where he learnt the craft of filmmaking. He scraped by bussing tables and operating forklifts to make ends meet while funding his own film.
And it took, how long did it take? I think it took like two years to make this 30-minute film, because I had to put it through post myself, so I slept for a year with a moviola and 16mm film, piles of it everywhere in my bedroom. Yeah, I earned $11,000 that year, and 7 of it went to finishing my movie. I actually got audited that year. The IRS wanted to know how I could only make $11,000 and have spent $7,000 on something deductible.
Yeah. Well.
And how is it that you can live for a year on $4,000? And I said, I don't know either. If I ever figure it out, I'll tell you. Yeah. But I did it.
In 1983, Darabont wrote and directed his first film, a short titled The Woman in the Room. The film was adapted from one of Stephen King's short stories of the same name. the rights to which Darabont purchased from King for only $1. Over the next 4 years, Darabont continued his work in the trenches on low-budget sets, until finally, in 1987, he earned his first on-screen credit as a writer for A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. For the next couple of years, Darabont made his living as a screenwriter on various horror movie remakes and sequels, such as The Blob in 1988 and The Fly 2 in 1989. Whilst he had earned his stripes as a horror writer, Darabont still wanted to get back behind the camera. He directed the made-for-TV film Buried Alive in 1990 and also wrote on the TV series The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles and Tales from the Crypt. In 1994, Darabont had one of the best feature directorial debuts in cinema history with The Shawshank Redemption, which we'll be covering today. He followed this up 5 years later by writing and directing The Green Mile in 1999, which killed at the box office and earned even more critical acclaim. Darabont directed The Majestic in 2001, which suffered at the box office and had mixed reviews. After a 6-year break, Darabont returned to both writing and directing with The Mist in 2007, another title which we'll discuss in a future episode. In 2010, Darabont wrote and directed the pilot for The Walking Dead, acting as executive producer and showrunner. However, there was a little bit of a falling out with AMC's execs, and Darabont was fired. I'm not going to go into the controversy surrounding that, but let's just say it wasn't pretty. I've skipped some of Darabont's work, but I think I've given you the gist. Darabont loves the supernatural, he loves horror. As he puts it, he loves the fantastic.
I loved anything dealing with the fantastic, and I can't explain why, but I always loved, when I was a kid, I always loved monsters, I always loved, spaceships, I always loved that, that little extra element of the fantastic, I always have.
But there's something deeper to Darabont's love. It's not simply the high-concept premises, eerie oddities, and creepy creatures that draw his attention. The foundation of all of these things is in character.
It's not about the monster in the closet. It's about the people who own the house where the monster is in the closet.
And often the people who lived there before.
Yeah, it's great characters and great storytelling that just happens to cross the line into the supernatural.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it really does come back to the idea that, people want to hear stories about people. It goes back to cave days. Let me tell you what happened to poor Og on the hunt today.
Right.
Because it's a really cool story. Let me tell you about it. I don't think that's ever going to change.
When the extraordinary is mapped onto the ordinary, character reveals itself. It's either given its time to shine, or its dark depths are exposed. The two works of Darabont's that I want to look at perfectly exemplify this duality: The Shawshank Redemption and The Mist. The former represents hope, the latter despair. Together, they speak to the internal schism carved into human nature. Let's start today with The Shawshank Redemption. Shawshank follows the road to redemption of two inmates at Shawshank Prison, Andy Dufresne and Alice Redding, known as Red in the film. Shawshank actually flopped upon its release in 1994, making only around $2 million on its opening weekend when compared to the $25 million budget. People put this down to a number of factors, such as fierce competition from other great films like Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump, a lack of interest in the prison genre, which admittedly for me was a big barrier to seeing the film, and even more trivial reasons, like the name being hard to remember.
I have to say, I saw this movie. It was really terrific. It's called. So that's it. That's what it did right there.
I like his riffs on this.
Yeah, what?
Oh, I had someone else the other day.
Scrimshaw retention? Or?
Scrimshaw reduction.
Yeah. Hudsucker reduction. I did, got that. Somebody said I saw you in Shimshunk, man.
Shimshunk.
Yeah.
I get Shimshunk reduction. Shimshunk redemption. Shimshaw.
Shimshaw. Sham.
It wasn't until Shawshank's 7 Academy Award nominations, a theatrical re-release, and transfer to VHS in 1995 that the film gained the immense popularity it still carries today. Shawshank began life as another short story by King called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which Darabont purchased for $1 in 1987. In 1992, Darabont adapted the short story into screenplay form over an 8-week period. The screenplay was so incredible that it sparked interest from numerous production companies. As the cast of Shawshank themselves put it,
The script is just it's a blueprint for great scriptwriting. There's all these little things in it that added up to just a tremendous script.
And it moves, it just moves, you know.
So what makes this screenplay so great? I believe it's the clarity of Darabont's vision. He has a key thematic crux upon which every story beat rests. Hope. Every scene either builds hope or takes hope away, often alternating to keep the reader on their toes. Darabont adds a whole sequence to his screenplay that was never in the original story that strengthens this theme, whilst raising the stakes for Andy and Red. Though there are many other beautiful moments in the script, it's this sequence that I'd like to focus on today. The death of Brooks Hatlin. In the book, Brooks is a minor character, but Darabont inflates his role in the story to create a symbol for despair, a cautionary tale of what prison does to a person who loses hope. Brooks is the potential future for Andy and Red, if they succumb to Shawshank. Brooks is introduced to us as a long-standing resident of Shawshank who has found comfort within its grey walls. He has his library, which he dutifully operates, he has his friends, who he helps by using his book cart to deliver packages, and he has Jake, a wounded bird that he has taken under his wing. Pun fully intended. In essence, Shawshank has provided Brooks with a place to be useful. Everyone needs to be needed. With this utility, Brooks has also earned a place as an expert on Shawshank. His opinions hold weight, deemed to reveal the truth of the prison. In this line, Brooks asserts that Andy will never get the warden to give him additional funding, referring to his statement as
one immutable universal truth.
This may seem like a fun bit of hyperbole, but as Red says following Brooks' freakout, if you ask Brooks to draw you a map of the world, he'd draw you Shawshank Prison. All Brooks knows anymore is Shawshank. Yes, it's given him purpose, but he's become dependent on it. So what happens when Brooks is ripped from his home of 40 years? Brooks tussles with the idea of committing a crime just so he can return to Shawshank. Upon first hearing the news, he attacks Haywood, another prisoner, putting a knife to his throat. Later, when he's out in society once again, he contemplates robbing the grocery store where he now works, even killing the manager, but decides he's
too old for that sort of nonsense anymore.
His passion, his spirit is gone. As Red says,
They send you here for life. That's exactly what they take. Part that counts anyway.
and ultimately, we see this drives Brooks to suicide. This is the irony of Shawshank. It claims to rehabilitate its prisoners, but quite clearly has no interest in doing so, and, in fact, has the opposite effect. Brooks is driven to commit crime by his time at Shawshank. He loses his real-world skills and becomes fearful of society. Shawshank makes a number of weak attempts to prove their desire to rehabilitate prisoners. They hold parole hearings, but the board has no interest in listening. They offer housing and jobs for released convicts, but the housing is depressing, and the work meaningless. The warden begins the Inside Out program as a genuine progressive advance in corrections and rehabilitation. But of course, this is just a scheme to make money. The system fails to rehabilitate its prisoners, and instead, it institutionalizes them. This concept is exemplified by Jake, Brooks' crow. Brooks feeds Jake, trying to raise him until he's strong enough to fly again. In the film, Brooks releases Jake, and he flies off to, presumably, reintegrate into the wild. But the script tells a very different story. After reading of Brooks' suicide, Andy finds Jake's body being eaten by ants in the library. Just like Brooks, Jake was unable to grow accustomed to life outside Shawshank. He had become dependent on Brooks, and so, without him, died. The script shows the men laying Jake to rest outside the prison grounds, along with Brooks' letter. Lord, both got institutionalized. See what you can do for him. Amen. Birds repeat throughout Darabont's screenplay as representations of the human spirit. A kind of ornithology symbology, if you will. I suppose the idea originally came from jailbird, slang for a prisoner originating from the image of a caged bird, a cruel denial of their ability to fly. As Red says after Andy escapes from Shawshank,
Sometimes it makes me sad, though, Andy being gone. I have to remind myself that some birds aren't meant to be caged. Their feathers are just too bright. And when they fly away, the part of you that knows it was a sin to lock them up does rejoice. But still, the place you live in is that much more drab and empty that they're gone. I guess I just miss my friend.
To Red, Andy is a bird that resists institutionalization, and his escape from Shawshank proves that there's hope. Throughout the screenplay, Andy preaches hope to the other inmates, and nowhere more so than in Darabont's added sequence. Following the death of Brooks, Andy is informed that his incessant letters to the Senate have finally earned him some funding and a donation of books and records. Andy cherishes this moment, picking out a song by Mozart and rebelling against the guards by playing it over the prison speakers. Even as the warden bashes on the door, Andy basks in the beauty of the moment, and the prisoners stand in awe. This is Andy's power, the power of hope, sorely needed after the death of Brooks. At the midpoint of the screenplay, we have a pivotal scene that shows the mental state of the characters and lays the groundwork for their trials in the second half of the screenplay. Andy returns from his 2-week stint in solitary, a punishment he received for playing Mozart, but he's unfazed. If anything, he's in higher spirits than ever. It was the easiest time he ever did. He talks about the beauty of music, how it can never be confiscated. He calls this place where music resides, hope. Red proceeds to have his parole rejected yet again, when he is visited by Andy. Andy gives him a gift, a harmonica. Red previously stated that
I played a mean harmonica as a younger man. Lost interest in it, though. Didn't make much sense in here.
he gave up the music in his life, gave up hope. Andy gives him this new harmonica to remind him, to breathe life into the small spark of hope that still remains in Red. And this, in my opinion, is the key question of the film. Can Red embrace hope? Can Red find redemption? Can he forgive himself for his sins and achieve peace? A line in the screenplay which didn't make it into the final film sheds more light on Red's fears, once again using birds. In this case, it's a quote from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. A little bit of backstory here. The Raven is a poem about a raven who drives the narrator mad. Andy reads the last line of the poem to Tommy. And the lamplight over him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. In the poem, the raven represents memories of the narrator's lost love that haunt him, trapping his soul. When applied to the context of birds in Shawshank, however, my belief is that the raven symbolizes what hope means to Red. Going back to our pivotal scene, we see that Red is wary of Andy's hope. As he puts it,
Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane. It's got no use on the inside. You better get used to that idea.
in the same way the narrator's memory of his lover drove him insane, so too can the memory of a time before Shawshank drive a convict insane. To try and recapture those lost days, to dream of them, is to live in the shadow of the raven, the shadow of hope. Nevermore, indeed. Okay, so that's a nice little thematic breakdown of Darabont's screenplay for The Shawshank Redemption. But that's not what this channel is about. This channel is about the technical aspects of screenwriting. How did Darabont communicate his themes in text? Darabont broke many of the conventional rules of screenwriting that are spouted by so-called screenwriting gurus today. But keep in mind, each time he broke a rule, he did so with trepidation, and so each decision was made with the utmost consideration. Perhaps the most obvious rule that Darabont broke was narration. Typically, narration is denounced since it tells the audience rather than showing them, undermining the very essence of cinematic storytelling. Darabont felt that narration was absolutely necessary to the tale of Shawshank.
Idea to have this the narration from Red.
Yeah.
Was that there?
That was very much a function of the voice that Steve King used to tell the story. It was a first-person narrative. In a sense, the story was narrated by Red. And that voice was so strong and so present in his story, and I really couldn't imagine the movie without it. So when I adapted the script, I followed that as my path.
Red's narration provides insight into the mind of an institutionalized convict. In a dream sequence that was cut from the final film, Red is sucked through the hole behind Andy's poster and transported to the Pacific Ocean. The view is idyllic, so liberating after being trapped in the walls of Shawshank for the entire film. But Red's narration tells a different story. An ocean so big it strikes me dumb. Waves so quiet they strike me deaf. Sunshine so bright it strikes me blind. It is a place that is blue beyond reason. Bluer than can possibly exist. Bluer than my mind can possibly grasp. I am terrified. There is no way home. How could you really express this sentiment without narration? And even if you could, would it carry the same weight? Would it hurt you as much? The heart-aching juxtaposition between the glory of the Pacific and the agoraphobic fear of Red's narration more than justifies the use of narration in this script. Darabont also doesn't shy away from writing in camera directions for important moments in the story. Camera movements in scripts are often frowned upon, as it's not the screenwriter's job to direct the camera. That's the director's job, it's kind of in their name. But throughout the script, Darabont uses the camera to hide and reveal key details to the audience. Its precise movements are essential for guiding audience attention. As Red proceeds to follow the same actions that Brooks did in his final moments, we get camera directions building to a moment. This moment is when Red decides whether he'll embrace the hope given to him by Andy or succumb to the fear that enveloped Brooks. Red plays out the same actions as Brooks, climbing the chair which once again wobbles queasily under his weight. And then we get another camera movement that glides up to the beam, revealing that Red has put the fear behind him. The clarity of image this camera direction provides far outweighs the drawback of taking control from the director's hands. One last rule that Darabont breaks that I'd like to comment on is that he often calls the soundtracks. Commonly, you'll hear that music should not be named because the license for the song may be exorbitantly expensive, and it's the music licensing department's job to make this decision. Therefore, the logic goes that if you name a track, you're unaware of these production difficulties and are more likely an amateur. I completely disagree with this idea, and Darabont demonstrates two reasons why. Firstly, the music named may simply set a specific tone that the writer has in mind. The ending of Darabont's script is played under Storms in Africa by Enya, a driving pulse. I believe Darabont was willing to lose that song from the final movie if necessary. He simply wanted a track that the reader could imagine while reading his script. Secondly, the music may not only set the tone, but may also have special significance to the plot in its meaning. The song played over the loudspeakers by Andy, The Marriage of Figaro, not only sounds uplifting, but is actually about infidelity. Of course, the infidelity of Andy's wife is exactly why he's in Shawshank in the first place, so the song has symbolic significance. Furthermore, Mozart's music is royalty-free, so Darabont could ensure that he would get to use this exact song in the movie. Once again, Darabont deftly breaks a common screenwriting rule. He breaks these rules sparingly and with purpose. It's because he understands the rules and why the rules exist that he's able to effectively break them. There's something almost rebellious about his writing, appropriate for a film about a prison break. Darabont is a self-taught screenwriter, and his expertise comes from rejecting unwavering commandments in favor of examining the logic behind their existence. Before we leave Shawshank, I'd like to look at one more symbol in the script: rock carving. Rock carving is what allows Andy to break out of prison. It's also something that he does to occupy his mind and pass the time. He commits himself to 2 decades of carving, with only a glimmer of hope as his motivation. As Red puts it,
geology is the study of pressure and time. That's all it takes, really. Pressure and time.
It's hard not to draw parallels between Red's speech here and Darabont's views on screenwriting.
One must continue to strive. One must continue.
Don't give up.
Don't give up. Persistence and tenacity really leads the way. And if you have the talent, then if you generate the luck, which persistence tends to do, it can fall in step for you. But the people who don't, it took me 9 years before I was able to actually make my living as a screenwriter. Really tough, lean years too. Yeah. But I never gave up, and I've had this joke for years, and it's actually not that much of a joke, which is there might be more talented screenwriters and directors out there working in Burger Kings across the nation who never found out that they had the ability to do it because they didn't have the belief and the persistence and the follow-through to do it,
Based on Shawshank alone, Darabont seems optimistic about the power of the individual to overcome their circumstances and their past and find redemption. In the next episode, I'll be covering Darabont's own counter-argument to this thing, his 2007 film The Mist, which paints a bleak tableau of the panicked human mind. From these 2 scripts, I'll draw some conclusions about Darabont's writing style and the lessons we can take from his example. Good writing and good luck.